Hello, hello. We are live with the end of the Ruins and Rolls campaign. Hello, everybody. We have a missing Kyle Ferrin, who I'm sure is running just a little bit late, but I have in his place the inimitable,
Inevitable. I'll go with the
inevitable.
Thanos.
That's really different, though. I am inimitable.
Yeah, it's a little slightly different.
I have the
Not as punchy.
inevitable. I mean, it's still true, right? I mean, like, you don't have nobody's out there imitating Thanos. That's not
I,
some big shoes to fill, big
I
gloves to fill.
guess. I guess.
The inevitable Brendan Conway. So
Uh, wait.
there you go. Yeah,
There
that
we
should
go.
capture that moment. That's good. So, well, welcome everybody. We are here to wrap up the end of the campaign, which has amazingly crossed the $350,000 mark,
Woo!
it's pretty great. I mean, it's like we said in our other live stream, like you never know, but at the same time, I mean, this is pretty cool because it's actually a big percentage of the original Root campaign.
hmm
So for our viewers who do not know why that matters, Brendan, why does that matter?
Well, the original Root campaign for us was a pretty big deal, and itself was surprising, amazing, wonderful. And going into any supplement campaign, the natural expectation is that it's probably going to do less than the original did. It's just basically what we've learned over a time in the
Yeah.
industry. Sometimes we see in board games it works a little differently, but that's a lot of the time because they're doing a reprint of the core game in a way that we're not really doing. And so we're sort of expecting it to be less, and it's always just a question of how much. So for this to be such a significant chunk of the original Kickstarter is pretty amazing, especially in terms of saying how much this is a living and thriving community and game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last part's the big one for me is that if Root wasn't being played, if people weren't excited about it, then we'd put this up, some small percentage of people about the original book would be in, and then that would be it. But like literally, I think hundreds of thousands of copies of Root have been sold. The board game have been sold since our original campaign. We have sold tens of thousands of copies of the core game, something like that. It's been a incredible journey to watch that community thrive. And there's a lot of people who are playing it at home, right? They're not just playing it at conventions or whatever we host it, but they're playing it at home, and everybody's excited to kind of expand it, do something different with it.
hmm
Yeah. So I know that we've been actually talking a lot about monsters here in the office because we're kind of wrapping up the design portion of the monsters. We have a lot of monsters left to show you. Kyle's art is a big part of what makes the monsters great. But I'm curious if you have some thoughts now, having done some dev passes on the monsters about how they relate to like ruins, like why we've put monsters and ruins together, like what role do they play together, because I think that's something we didn't get a chance to talk about before.
Yeah, I kind of see it as another reason to draw you out of the clearing. You could easily imagine a situation in which a monster is, functionally a Godzilla. And I love me a Godzilla, and so I'm perfectly happy with the story that says this monster has come into the clearing. But Root
Yeah.
has no trouble creating uh existential threats to a clearing. Like that's never been a problem.
Well, I think it's
Uh,
hilarious because now we have like 10 factions, right? I mean, nine
right.
plus the vagabonds. Like at some point you're like, so we have people pitch us clerics that are like, there are five factions in this cleric. We're like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
A lot.
Like that's too much, right? Yeah.
It's a lot to manage. And yeah, at any given moment there could be conspirators and agents from factions that don't have significant presence there. There could be
Right.
countless things going on that can blow up the clearing. And vagabonds have this natural instinct then, just in terms of players and playing a game, to want to be where the action is, and it feels like it's often in the clearing. And putting monsters more explicitly beyond the clearing, in the forest, with ruins, in spaces that the vagabonds can be drawn into, and that explicitly, according to the fiction, nobody but the vagabonds ever really wants to go to.
Right.
That's crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a thing there where when we look at a space of play, like any space, it doesn't matter if it's Masks or Root or Urban Shadows or whatever, we're always looking at an arena of conflict and saying, like, what's going to happen within that arena? So, like, one of the reasons that we don't really have in Urban Shadows, for example, like a very common urban fantasy trope is that there's another like spirit world on
Mhm.
top of this world. That's a very common thing. In your campaign of Urban Shadows, that might totally be a thing. But
Yeah,
it's not a thing across all of Urban Shadows because like 2/3 of the playbooks wouldn't really have any access to it.
right,
Like, or we would have to say, you'd have to say in the setup of your game, there exists this other spirit world, and everybody has access to it through these magics or whatever, but it's not a regular
right.
part of the game because it's not something that every playbook has access to. So you end up with this arena of conflict. Let's go into the spirit world and do stuff that only some people can play in.
Yep,
Right. And so that doesn't really work. Whereas what's great about Werewolf the Forsaken is that you're like, hey, we're a pack of werewolves. Our job is to police this boundary between the spirit world and the normal world, and therefore every PC and in fact many NPCs then have access to it, right? So what you're really talking about is kind of creating an arena of conflict around the monsters. And you mentioned that like only the vagabonds can deal with it, and I'm curious what where that instinct comes from.
well, it's always been one of the core premises built just from the original board game that the vagabonds can enter into the forests between the clearings.
Right.
And that was one of their most important special powers that differentiated them from every other faction. So it's just honoring that further.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hey, Kyle, welcome. He's connected. It's the tag Kyle Ferrin is connecting to audio where everybody says hello and he can't hear us. I'm just reminded of the joke that all Zoom is the Ouija board of the 21st century. Like, Kyle, are
yeah,
you with us? Kyle, can you hear us? So yeah, I think there's another thing because I'm running a campaign where we're testing some of these monster mechanics, and there's an interesting kind of weird thing about the Godzilla-ness of monsters that there's this fun kind of like, of course I could throw 100 Marcasot soldiers against it, but it wouldn't work. Like my soldiers are powerless in the face of this giant fish, and you vagabonds are uniquely qualified to deal with a giant fish. Like it's like kind of a fun, almost Witcher kind of moment, like we talked about before, of like the vagabonds are just uniquely suited to deal with this kind of threat in a way that the Marcasot withstanding a siege is not a vagabond problem, right? In the same way. So, well, Kyle, can you speak? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
If I'm
wonderful.
talking?
Hello.
Oh my word.
We have
Mark knows this, but we're doing some work on our house, and playing the which breaker is for which room game is not always my favorite, but it's a skill issue. Everything else is fine now.
great,
Thank you
wonderful.
for being patient with me.
It worked out, brother. It worked out. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. It's just been busy at my house. We're doing right now, work for the RPG and things for the upcoming Root expansion material that we're doing. So I'm deep in Rootland,
Yeah,
and
that's great.
I think we got a chunk of the team from Leader Games is at Essen this week, and so it's fun to see the kind of the arcs release across the ocean from here, and it's been an exciting thing to see secondhand too. But I'm doing
Yeah.
well.
Good, good, good. Yeah, it's funny. We don't usually go to Essen. It's very hard to get so many books all the way there. And so I always forget that right around October 1st, everybody disappears. Like everybody's gone, right? Like nobody responds to emails, like it's over.
Hmm.
So
Yep, I've never been, but it's a big deal. So we have a little presence there, and some people over there who have helped with our localization, who are helping us out with showing off games and stuff like that. So
that's awesome. Good, good. Well, I know that we were talking about monsters from the mechanical side of thinking about making creating a space for vagabonds that's kind of unique, but like on the art side, like what are you excited about when it comes to drawing and illustrating these new parts of the woodland?
I was excited to draw big fish. I've taken up I've always gone fishing with like my dad when I was a kid and stuff, but
That's
my
great.
brothers took up fly fishing some years ago, and this year I took it up too. So it's been fun to sort of explore that as a different avenue. I always knew when we did root that we kind of wanted to leave some space for some kind of creatures not to be
Yeah.
anthropomorphic. And I think as a general rule, it's usually like fish and bugs that don't really fit into that, you know, cuddly animal criteria. So
Is
that
there
was fun.
mammalophile? I don't know what you like. There's some
Yeah,
mammalian
yeah. I mean,
bias.
we got lizards, we got
Yeah, the
frogs
lizards.
now,
Yeah,
but you can
yeah.
look at a fish and be like, no soul. It's okay. Uh, no, it's but you need something for cats to eat, you know, and you need
Yeah,
something
yeah,
you know, I think the rules are pretty similar across a few different anthropomorphic animal things to sort of have fish outside the
yeah.
natural order. For one thing, it's just hard for to have them interact with other, you know, thinking clothed beings. But
Yeah.
just it I don't know, it makes sense. So that one's been fun. I think it's been fun to look at some of the bugs and things that we can make fit that criteria too. Because I mean,
Yeah.
when I think of role playing games, I think it's hard to get away from that. You know, we're going to explore a dungeon now kind of feeling, and especially with the, you know, the ruins that you're working on. I think you kind of need something like that to be able to pit your vagabonds against. That's not always going to be, you know, somebody else whose family you have to worry about, or
Well,
you know,
the
their
deeper you get,
allegiance. You know, like
yeah, the deeper you
yeah,
get into the ruins, the less sense it makes. Like, oh, look at these eerie soldiers who are 10 levels down. What are you guys doing down
uh-huh.
here? Like,
Bird nap.
yeah,
They're
right,
burrowing
exactly.
owls. Yeah.
Right. So having like we're actually really excited about the swarm animals is like what we're kind of calling them, because they actually have a
Hmm.
mechanic where you can get overwhelmed. So there's this thing of like when you meet one ant, you're like, okay, well, kill him quick before he summons all the others. But then when
Yeah.
more of them start to show up, there's actually like kind of a countdown timer to the point that you can't fight them because there's just too many of them,
Hmm.
right? So it's giving us a way to
Yeah.
kind of
And
engage the mechanics differently.
I love that because we my closest touchstone for that in a role playing setting is I think fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons had some interesting mechanics for swarm
Yeah.
monsters, and we used it to make sort of one guard unit as a swarm, so like a swarm of humans, and it was gargantuan sized, and it would just like that was what you would use if like your players were being like really antisocial and you needed to get them to stop doing terrible things. But
Yeah,
so you
like
didn't have to
some.
bust it out too often, but it was a funny thing to have exist. I think it makes more sense to have like an ant swarm than a
Yeah.
than a swarm of guards.
Well,
But
we do this dance that we talk about all the time, and I know you know it too, which is like there's a point at which you're like, can we have a swarm of mosquitoes? Well, could you hit a mosquito with a sword? Is it big enough to hit with a sword? Because you still have to hit it with a sword. Like there's these like weird
mhm.
sizing issues that you're always dealing with Root. And I know you sent over a sizing chart, was like one of the very first things you did for the monsters was like, here's a vagabond and here's the fish, right?
Yeah, yeah, and see, that's one of the things that I've always tried to do with the root animals is kind of show that they're all the characters are on a pretty similar scale, but sort of like the difference between the height of a badger and the height of a mouse would be like the same difference as like the height of a pretty tall person compared to a pretty short person. Like they don't look like the actual scale between a badger and a mouse is
Right. Like
crazy. Like
100 times,
it
right? Like
wouldn't
it's
really work.
yeah, yeah.
And so and to sort of put things like deer or bears more on the scale of like what an ogre or a giant would be in a different fantasy setting. And so with the bugs, I wanted to make sure like, hey, this ant can't be actual ant sized. Like it's going to be like maybe waist high to the
Yeah.
mouse or
Yeah.
you know something like that to pose an actual threat, but also to be you know something worth conquering, you know, something that you would be if there was you know a beetle that was bigger than you are. I mean, even if it's not trying to eat you in some sense, I mean that's something that could trample crops, it could you know break down fences that are keeping other pesky things out of the way. There's lots of ways that you can explore that space if you get the sizing kind of on a consistent scale. So
Well, I think what's interesting about Root is that you're one of the things I think surprised us when we first started working with you all is that there's really a cool intersection between you, Patrick, and Cole about like who kind of designs what, right? And you're responsible for a lot of the design of the woodland because the aesthetics kind of lead to outcomes, if that makes sense. And I
Yeah.
don't, Brendan, for you as the designer of the original, you were the lead designer of the original game. What are some of your thoughts about like where the art took us? Because we're like, well, this is what the art says, so we gotta follow it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that we immediately were able to key into, such as like, birds clearly are holding weapons, and so let's not worry about any nonsense about like, but how do you hold weapon with a wing? Whatever, it's not relevant. Here's a picture, he's doing it, it's fine. Everybody move on. Let's just
Hmm.
keep going. And we
Right.
know they're wearing different kinds of armor, and we know that like the kinds of tools that they have, which is all super helpful. And I know we had a discussion at some point where we sort of asked, are any of them wearing leather armor? Do we need to worry about where leather came from? And I think it was you, Kyle, who had the like, no, there's a plant, and it like is the equivalent of leather, and we're fine. It's fine.
Don't think
Well,
about
and
it.
it's yeah, well, it's ground that's had to be tread before, right? I mean, this is
Right.
not the only anthropomorphic thing that people have done. So when you watch like Disney's Robin Hood, yeah, where's the leather armor coming from there?
Right,
Did they have
right.
livestock in that setting? One of the big ones that comes up a lot is horses. So
Yeah.
like in Root, when the Badgers have carts, it's like they got to be hand carts because
Yeah. Well,
what's
but
pulling them?
what
And
if they
now I think you can look
domesticate
at
some beetles? What if they are able to
some beetles.
domesticate
Yeah,
some of those
exactly.
large beetles, right?
But but it's this weird space. So one of the touchstones for me is Redwall, right? And
Yeah.
so you look at all the Brian Jacques stuff, and I think people forget that in the first Redwall book, he was kind of feeling out the setting a little bit.
Yeah.
And Clenny the Scourge, the rat, and all his rat guys, they come riding in on a carriage pulled by a horse. And
Oh, really?
it's
Like
like,
just
yeah.
there's a
And it's
horse
like,
and there's no
whose horse is
explanation?
that? Is a horse like a human scale horse? And I think it is, but then it's like, so wait, are there people in and it like and it crops up all these interesting questions. One of the ones that somebody asked me at a convention that I thought was pretty interesting because they were doing some Root fan art, and they said they were showing me pictures of the birds I had drawn and the lizards I had drawn, and they say, how do you determine which animals wear shoes and which don't? uh
You're like gut
and
instinct.
Well, I think instinctually, because then that makes me examine my own instincts, right?
Right,
And
yeah,
so one of the
yeah.
things that I was examining was like, I think it's because if their feet are a big indicator of like the overall like animal that they are, I think that's when they don't wear shoes. Because like if you're a bird and they have like little boots on, I think they're not going to look as much like a
I
bird.
see.
Whereas like a
Yeah.
rabbit wearing shoes or not might not. And so like because bird feet are such a big part of what makes them look like birds. And so the same thing happened when I had to examine that when we were doing the RPG and introducing frogs, or not the RPG, but the upcoming expansion.
Yeah.
We were introducing frogs, and I was looking back at some of the RPG frogs that I'd done and be like, yeah, frogs don't wear shoes either.
Yeah.
Because frogs frogs' feet is a big part of what makes them look like frogs. So
Well, I have to say that I was surprised then to see that goats wear shoes because
yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
right. Like, but their hooves are less important, I think, than their faces, right?
Yeah.
Because the face, that's a goat because it's got the
Yeah.
goat face, right? So, but yeah, like there's all these things we joke
Hmm.
internally about there's a Arrested Development scene where Job has sold his banana grabber rights to Michael. And one of the characters says,
Hmm.
why would a banana grab another banana? And we always joke internally that like half our job as RPG designers is to answer these questions of like, but why is it only lizards? Why aren't there also snakes? Well, snakes don't have hands. Okay, but what does that mean? Like bearded
Well,
dragons don't have hands either, really?
and I feel bad because I'm the illustrator of the company, but in some ways I kind of function as art director too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it makes it kind of an interesting combination. But we had this thing where we were doing kind of this armored faction that Patrick was working on that eventually became the Badgers, which are like
Yeah.
almost like Templars.
Yep.
And for a while we were like, are they turtles? Are they turtles? Because I mean, kind of like
Mm,
armored, da,
yeah.
da, da, da. And we had people who were like, yeah, give us turtles. And I kept looking at it, just like, I don't think I can put pants on a turtle and make it look like correct.
So you mean it's just
Like,
going to
do
end up
their
looking like a
clothes?
Ninja Turtle? Like it's going
Well,
to have
yeah,
like
because like there's a
swords and
reason
then
that
like
Ninja Turtles are like a belt. Like
right, yeah,
their shell is
their
functioning as their
their
clothes.
clothes. Yeah, that's their
But
clothes. Yeah.
if you put a Ninja Turtle with a fox from Root, they look super naked. They just do. And so like the alternative is to put clothes on top of the shell,
Oh, it's
and
awkward.
then
Yeah.
then it just makes them look a certain way. So like we have a tortoise in the role playing game,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he
yeah.
just looks like a kindly kind of like grandpa character because
He
he's got
does.
like a sweater like
Yeah.
over his shell, and
Yeah.
so it's harder to make. I don't know. I guess you could make it look like. See, now I'm thinking about how I would do it, but
Right. Yeah,
they
yeah.
ended up
Well,
being badgers. And then when we did an Ahoy expansion, we added turtles, and I was like, the rules are different. They're naked. It's fine.
it's
They're
fine.
wearing pirate
They're
belts and
pirates. Yeah.
boots
Yeah.
and
Well, so
everything
I
else.
just got in today. This is the like a quick start from Germany. So we get these, they send them over. They're really
Hmm.
cool. We get the little Pegasus Spiel logo here, and you see the all their titles seem much more impressive than ours. Schnellstarter Krallenbull. Right. So there you go.
Hmm.
And what's always super fun about these, kind of looking at how they've repurposed the art and changed things around and stuff, is like, you see some of what you're talking about, where here's the vulture who, no shoes, definitely got those claws at the bottom, right? But like one of the
Hmm.
reasons the moles work so well is because they look great in clothes, right? Like these moles look great. Like they can wear
Well,
glasses, they can have little
yeah,
middle medals, right?
yeah. Well, and one of the key things for making them look like moles is making sure that their hands could be really big,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
right,
so
yeah.
always having them in kind of loose sleeves and things like that is to make sure they had little diggy hands. And even though they're holding a pickaxe or a shovel, uh, that's a key thing of making them look that way. So,
That's great.
yep.
That's cool. Well, I know we were talking about doing some art on stream. Are you able to draw something today?
Yeah, let me show you what I've been kind of working on.
Cool. And then I have
Blah,
some other
blah.
questions once we get set up, but I think that
Yeah.
what's always really cool for people is to see the process of you putting this together. And I think all of us who are creative professionals in the industry know there's like a lot of sausage making behind the scenes. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Vegetarian sausage making behind the scenes of making the animals work, and like talking about which animals actually fit and how they fit. And that's why I've been pushing bats in every single meeting I've ever had with Cole, is like, hey, have you guys considered bats? What about the bats? Have some bats, because I think the bat, like
See.
this bat you drew here, this guy, this is like one of my favorite
Uh-huh.
drawings you've ever done. He's incredible. Like he's so like
See, and we have bats coming, but that was another one where it was like what like they're very cloaky, Yeah, they
yeah,
have to
yeah,
have like a cape or a
yeah,
cowl or
right.
something like that because the wings can't go up to their armpits or it'd
Right.
be a little bit goofy.
Yeah, it's a little
Let
weird. Yeah.
me let me open something really quick and then I'll be able to share a window. So as you know, most of what I do from a like let me get my words together. Most of what I do from like a technique standpoint is largely traditional, and then I color digitally. So
Yeah.
most of what I'm going to be able to show is some of the coloring things. Um, and this will unfortunately be kind of a plug here for another thing because let's do this. So this is
Woo.
this is for Direwolf Digital, who does the Root Digital implementation.
Yeah.
They are doing some releases, and in the past they did a skin for us of just sort of an alternate Eerie skin. So when you're playing as the Eerie, you can be just a different looking bird. And so with their most recent release, they asked if they could do kind of a Puss in Boots themed take on the Marquise. And so that's what this is. So I'll show you kind of what I do. So all of this is drawn traditionally. Let's see. That's not what I want to do.
That's great. Great mustache.
So, and I've shown kind of some of the well, cats are one of the animals that you can give a mustache and it still makes them look normal. If you do a mustache on a bird, where do you put it?
Above the beak.
That's
Right? Isn't that the rule?
yeah,
It's above the
above the
beak.
beak, and it just looks wrong. And it's funny because, like, as a birder, as somebody who enjoys bird watching, there is the one of the ways that you can identify or distinguish between crows and ravens is that ravens have mustaches, and that's literally what they call them. It's like the fuzz above their beaks. But
That is
yeah, it's a little
incredible. I
weird.
had no idea. We have a long running
They're also
joke.
bigger.
Yeah. We have a anytime anybody mentions a raven, I flinch because there is a long running joke in our community here that I do not know the difference between an owl and a raven. Because one time I was playing Ori in the Blind Forest and I was insistent upon playing it that it was a raven that was the villain of the game, and I was wrong. And so everyone has never let me forget that for the last decade. So I receive all sorts of owl and raven paraphernalia with the implication that I can't tell the difference between the two. So,
Which is funny
so
because you're magpie, right? You should
right,
know.
I should know.
Mag
I think that's the big
magpies
one.
are corvids. Yeah. One of the other funny things that came up, because we have the corvid conspiracy
Yeah.
faction, and corvids encompasses a lot more than I think people know too. So, like blue jays, one of the kind of iconic Erie birds are blue jays, but blue jays are corvids too. So
Yeah. You get
all
all
right,
the
so
jays, the rooks, and nutcrackers too, right?
yeah. Okay, why did that happen? Did I put this on its own layer? Okay, so what I'll do, this is just kind of a color file, color sample, and it's this color palette plus a few other things. Um, like I also have, I keep just a very small version of the root cover art on my desktop in case I need to
Yeah.
sample one of those other colors.
Yeah.
And those colors are what I illustrate all of root with. So one of the things is that makes root kind of look the way it does is that there's not really a true red. Um, there is this kind of orange that I use for most of the red tones. There is kind of this like pink
Yeah.
red that I used on the cover, and I
Huh.
do throw that in sometimes. And then there's like when I did the Marauder, like the rats, they have the red player pawn, and then I incorporated that red into their colors. But for the most part, everything that needs to be red is that color. So what I'll do is I'll just color, try and flat in my scanned line artwork. And most of the stuff I scan, I do at 600 DPI.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is I don't always know how big it needs to be in the end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if it's something like one of our cards from Oath, like the cards in Oath are pretty small. The cards in Oath are pretty small, but I don't know what they're going to end up on. So
Yeah.
if someone like you guys needs to use it for a different application inside of a book, then high resolution is better. If the graphic designers at work need to make like a stand at a convention or a banner,
Yeah. That's
then
another good
having
example.
something higher resolution helps. It's very funny. I have this Epson scanner. This isn't even really my office. Like I said, we're doing work in our house, so I'm just kind of the wandering computer right now. But this Epson scanner that I have, if you ask it to scan at 300 DPI, it's like, done. Way to go. I'm awesome. And then if you say scan at 600 DPI, it's like, oh boy, okay. And then it takes a long time to
Yeah.
do it. It's like we built in that functionality, but it is not streamlined.
That's
We'll
great.
do it, but we won't like it. But one of the things I try to do is pick pretty high contrast colors between the pupil / iris and the rest of the
Yeah.
eye, since that's what most people look at most of the time. Just kind of to start what people's brains recognize. I have this masked, so I can't really color outside the lines of the general shape, but as you can see, I can still like go overlap and that kind of stuff. One of the things that I started doing with Root that sort of bled its way into people thinking it of as just my style is coloring the line work. And really, I just started doing that because I like Wayne Reynolds and I was cheating to try and do what he does. So Wayne Reynolds does a lot of art for D&D, does art for Pathfinder. He does, I mean, if you Google him, you'd look and be like,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
he
he's
does
the
the
guy who
original,
draws.
the big Pathfinder cover with the dragon and the sorcerer, like right
Well,
up
and like
right
every
there.
picture you've ever seen of like a Warforged character
Yeah.
is that. So but one of the things he does on things like Warforged or creatures that are metal or people wearing armor or anything like that is that he will use white as a way of setting the characters off from the background on the highlight
Mm,
regions. And that was really important for me for Root because especially with this pretty limited color palette, I needed to be
yeah,
able to set foreground characters and background characters apart from each other.
that's pretty
So
cool.
um like this mouse and this cat, you can see like all of the upper edges kind of where like the light source would be
Yeah.
is where those
I
white
get,
regions are, and everything else not. So usually I wait until I've colored everything in the fill layer before I come back and do lines. That way I can mix it up a little bit. But that's an important thing about making Root look like Root. One of the things that I
it's an interesting thing you're saying about like having to make your own art look like the art for the game, right? Like we have that feeling too of like we're always evaluating the design work we're doing, and it's like, does this feel like Root, or have we gotten off the line, right? Like outside of what the
yeah.
game is supposed to be doing. So like when we're talking about the monsters, Brendan and I have this big discussion about, are monsters supposed to be like a challenge the vagabonds always overcome, or are they supposed to be like just artifacts of the world? Like, this is a giant trout.
hmm
If it eats you, it eats you, right? And it's like, which one is more true to Root, right? And which one feels right? And so there's this interesting thing of, people think we just do whatever, I guess, like we just design whatever we want to design, but like there's a
hmm
constant check. Does this feel like a Root character? Does this look like a Root character?
Well, and it takes on a little bit of a life of its own, where people who have identified with it heavily
Yeah,
start to have their own kind of interpretation of what fits and what doesn't fit.
yeah,
Uh, and so oftentimes, I mean, this is going to sound really cocky, but sometimes if I need to look up a picture and I know that it's online, I'll just Google it instead of looking for it in my files.
yeah.
Because if I just need a picture reference, so it looks
Yeah,
like on my computer, I'll just search Kyle Ferrin art or whatever, but
yeah,
it's me
right.
being lazy, not being
Somebody else has
super
done the.
cocky.
Yeah, so well, I mean, the other day I was trying to look up something for the keepers, and I just went to the Law of Root that's online because I was like, well, I'm not going to get the board game out. I'm just going to go look on the Law of Root and see what it says, right? So well,
Well,
one
and
quick.
it's funny because that is a dangerous slope to go down because I can recognize my own work from fan art really easily, but not everyone can do that.
Right.
And I've actually been on I've been on the offending end of that before because I drew years ago. I drew some fan art of Mouse Guard, um, that Dave Peterson wrote and illustrated. And
Yeah.
there, it was just on DeviantArt or something, and it's like some of the only stuff I ever posted on DeviantArt. And someone was doing a convention where there was a book signing with David Peterson, but
Oh
the
no.
banner that they made was using my fan art of Mouse Guard on it. And I was like, and so he knew who I was from Twitter, just barely, and was like, "Oh, hey, check this out." And I was like, "Sorry." It's like, I'll make sure that it's tagged appropriately or whatever. But
Well, didn't Brendan,
it's
we had an incident where you felt like we had made it because somebody at Gen Con stole our art. Do you
Yeah,
still
it's
have it?
actually this right here
Oh, great.
because it was a lunch menu at the Fat Rooster at Gen Con, and it has like stolen art of Mr. Fantastic and Wonder Woman and Pikachu and Green Lantern, and up in the top left corner is the Nova from Masks for some reason.
So they
That's how we
Googled
knew we made
they
it.
Googled like superhero art and they decided to steal our art from the RPG,
Yep,
which is just totally, but like we've made it. We've made it. Like,
exactly.
Woohoo!
That's it. I love it. Well, just to note, because we have only about 12 minutes to go, but we are at $381,000
Woo!
for the end of the campaign, which is pretty incredible. So thanks for joining us here, Kyle, for the end. We'll probably flip over for the last 5 minutes to count down, but this is so cool, man, to see you do this in real time.
No problem. Hey, I will do. I was just going to ask you how many backers total. That's
Yeah.
how
So
many backers are you?
we're almost 4,000 backers. So we're at
That
3,883 right
is
now.
that's so cool, and I hope everybody who is backing it appreciates how much you know we appreciate them. How much the things that we get to make are so
Yeah.
influenced by their support and we have instances where people for leader games will be like, why should we buy from you versus buying at a game store or whatever? And it's like the short version is like, we don't care if you buy from a game store. That's still good. We want those
Yep.
places to be there. But if you support us directly, that you're supporting, we get to make the stuff. We
Yeah.
get to make more of it. And if you like that, then that's how it gets made. So yeah, I'll let you go to your thing. But this is going to be the skin, like I said, for
That's
the
so
root
cool. Well, we have a couple of minutes. Don't
digital
no need to
thing.
rush. Like we got a couple minutes.
Okay,
But like yeah, like
just kick me off whenever you're ready.
the core of it, like you said, I mean, I think people forget what it was like for RPGs, especially. I mean, board games too, but RPGs before Kickstarter. Like you just hear stories about
Hmm.
people just taking a mortgage out on their house and going and printing 3,000, 4,000 copies and just hoping it would sell. There was no
Yeah.
real way to check if something was going to work, and stuff that was hits just you couldn't get. Like, so the transformation in the industry over the last 15 years of people being able to support stuff they're excited about and fund those first 4,000 copies, it's game changing. I mean, there's a renaissance of RPGs because of that. They're directly linked. The funding makes it possible for
Hmm.
us to do the work. And I think that's also true on the board game side, obviously, but I think you guys also have the capacity to release stuff. I mean, Kickstarter is kind of where it's at. Kickstarter backer gets where it's at for all RPGs, and a lot of
Yeah.
board games are in the same place.
Well, I think Kickstarter has enabled us, board games and RPGs, to gauge interest, get funding, but also kind of like throw a party for
Right.
all of the people who love this stuff. And I don't think that third thing can be understated. Or overstated. It's so fun just to get together with the people who all care about this stuff and try and make the best thing possible. One of the other things is that it enables us to find like these things that we don't know how niche it's going to be, right?
Right. Right.
And then when you find these like-minded people, or people it's like who are all tapping into the same kind of nostalgia base that you are. I mean, it is kind of like a bonding experience. There was a role-playing game. I didn't get it when it was on the Kickstarter. I got it afterward, but it's only because I didn't hear about it. Called May You Fish in Interesting Times. Have you heard of that one? It's
I'm not
you're
familiar with it.
like you're anthropomorphic birds in sort of like a post-war where you're in a rebellion that failed, uh, but you're all fishing, and and sort of so you go through this thing where you all talk about stuff, and then at the end, like the secret police comes and you get busted or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
but to me, I saw that and I was like, that meme about they made this hole right. I mean, this is my hole. This is
Yeah.
exactly for me because it's like
This wasn't
you're
made for
birds,
me.
you're
Yeah.
fishing. It's a role playing game. Yeah, like it's like somebody knew me and were like, no, this is the exact thing that I would be interested in. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
without crowdfunding opportunities, it would be really hard to do that.
Well,
It would be hard to even find out those things exist.
I was just having my stepdaughter just started doing art school classes at the community college. So she just got out of high school and she's doing her first art classes. And we had a talk this morning about like you have to find the balance between what you can do what you're excited to do and what other people are excited to have you do. And there's some stuff where like I would say I am super excited to do this, and there's super excited group of people to do this, but I can't do it. It's I don't have the skill, I don't have the connections, it's not my project. But when you find one of those ones that's all three, like we have with Root the RPG, where we're super excited to build the world of Root and do more things with it, and you guys are excited as partners to do it, and we can do it, like we have the skill levels to do it and bring it to life, and then there's an audience, it's this really special thing, right? And Kickstarter enables all those things to come together really beautifully. So it's very, very cool.
Yeah.
I do want to honor that we have a couple people who asked questions. So one of the questions that we got asked was, are there, and I know you probably can't answer this in full, but are there plans for like Root comic books or Root fiction or Root something? Like, do you have anything to tease about what might happen?
Well, we can kind of cheat because you guys have done all the world building for us, right? Like we can go in there and be like, how does this stuff work? Because like when we first made Root, there was this question that stemmed from this really simple question, which was, do the vagabonds have names?
Oh, interesting.
And
Are they individual
because
characters, you mean?
right, and so that question, because for a while we just called the thief raccoon vagabond, we call him Roger, and we still call like the plushie that we made, that's Roger. But the reason that was a question is because like, hey, we could go really far into this and like have every single clearing on the board game have a name. We could,
Mm,
and we ultimately decided that at least for the board game application, that it was more important for us to keep some of that stuff setting agnostic, to keep it kind of
yeah.
nebulous, so people could imprint on it themselves,
Yeah.
so people who liked a certain card combo or part of the map or something like that could make it their own, and have it be individual that way. So we've kind of shied away from making anything like too like another example is like who is supposed to win Root,
Yeah. Right.
right? Because
There's
if you're
no
playing a
winner.
Star Wars
Yeah.
game, yeah, and you're playing a Star Wars game, like you can be the Empire, but like everybody knows that like the Empire is not really supposed to win the Star Wars game
That's not
because
my
the
experience
Star
of
Wars,
playing the Star Wars game with Brendan.
yeah, yeah. But that's but there's like a body of work to draw
Yeah.
from to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
what is the what's the actual
Right.
outcome? And with Root there is not one, that because it's all perspectives, right? So when I mean, this is kind of a really weird way to answer the question, is are you ever going to do a comic book? But it's like the story of a comic book of Root has to grapple with that question, which is like, do the cats win? Do like are
Yep.
is the Woodland Alliance justified? Um, and while you're playing the board game, it's all a matter of perspective. If you are playing as the Woodland Alliance, you feel like Robin Hood.
Yep.
You feel like you're sticking up for the people and stuff. But if you are playing against the Woodland Alliance, especially in the game where you haven't played against them before, you're like, oh my gosh, these flipping terrorists
Yep.
are, making, and it's like, so it's all a matter of perspective, where it's like, hey, you are Robin Hood to you, and you are a terrorist to everyone else. And as the cats, it's like you're just trying to bring order to this wilderness, but to everyone else, you're colonist outsiders. And so, if we were going to do a comic book, that's the kind of questions that we'd have to grapple with. And
Yep.
I don't know. I'm not going to ever say no to something like that permanently, because I never know. But there's some interesting questions with dealing with that kind of approach,
Well, we have the
where
same thing
things that
with
we've
masks.
intentionally tried to
Yeah.
avoid with the board game.
Yeah, we have the same thing with masks. Actually, we were really surprised. Like we do playbooks, right, which are basically vagabonds. Like that's why that match works so well. But Brendan, I think we were really surprised to find that people were like, "No, but tell me about that guy, that one guy."
I mean, I think it's sort
Hmm.
of as Kyle is saying, it's that navigation of having such a strong and iconic image that you imprint upon it, and
Yeah.
being like, oh, I have brought my own things. I have my own head canon almost of who this person is and what they are, and I kind of want to know the truth so I can build on it in other ways and think about it even further. But they're so evocative. I'm invested, and yeah, I totally feel this thing for that you've just gone through, Kyle, because like when we play the board game, we come out of it with those different positions and senses and almost empathy for the particular faction we play that we wouldn't necessarily want in that moment to be hindered by, oh, but I recognize that character exactly. That's the Luke Skywalker of the Woodland, and I threw him into a cell. I
Yeah.
don't feel bad when I played the Empire, to be clear, and when I tried to turn Luke to the dark side, but I would feel bad if it was the Luke Skywalker of the Woodland Alliance. That would make me feel
That
sad.
would be different. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's enough bullshit Skywalker nonsense that you don't feel bad about anything in Star Wars at this point. But yeah, like, can you imagine breaking the will of the little raccoon who eventually dethrones the Marquise? Like, they just feel terrible, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So yeah,
already
it's
all
an
of us,
interesting
when you
question.
play with the Vagabonds, when you play with the Vagabond, everybody knows somebody's going to need to punch the Vagabond in the face, but nobody
Yeah.
really wants to do it.
Yeah, because he might be friendly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's it's just an interesting thing to have to deal with. But so
Yeah.
were there, I don't know if that answers that question, but
No, I think it
if
does. I think it's always interesting to
that's a
hear.
super political answer.
Well, I think it's always interesting to hear what people struggle with on the creative side, where, there's a world in which it went a really different way. And I think that's actually really shocking to people, because when you end up with the final thing, then it looks to everybody like, well, that was it. That was the only version of that thing that would ever exist. But actually there's a very different one
Yeah.
where you would name those vagabonds and they would have stories behind them, and you would have clearings, and the vagabonds would be from clearings, and that's just a really different game than Root as we have
hmm
it.
Well, and I think people would be surprised to know how much, maybe they wouldn't be, maybe it's really obvious, but how much is sort of done on the fly, and especially with Kickstarter, where it's like we're kind of learning people's preferences. But when we first went to Kickstarter, the colors for all of the meeples were different until
Yeah.
like maybe the day before.
Yeah.
And we didn't really even have a solution for the meeples until like a week before.
Yeah.
They might have been discs at one point, and I can't right now. I can't even imagine what Root would look like if it was all discs instead of meeples. It probably would not have taken off the same way it has. I mean, hopefully the gameplay would still get people, but it wouldn't have that sort of marketing visual that
Well,
gets from the table presence of the meeples.
there's an alchemical reaction, right, from everything coming together in just this particular way.
Mm.
And it's really hard to separate any one part of it, but here we are. So, all right, 30 seconds to go. We're down here to the end. 382, which is wonderful. Thank you all. Incredible. Just so cool to see so much love for Root, the RPG. And of course, 15 seconds here to go, but you guys are launching a new campaign soon. So more Root is on the way.
Yeah, October 22nd. So
Just a couple
catch us then.
weeks.
I'm sure we'll post more about it. So 543, it's coming up.
There
Congrats.
we go. Yeah, woo!
Yay, confetti
That's
time.
fantastic. Wonderful. That's great. Well, thank you all for joining us. We're going to hang out for a couple of minutes and just to kind of wrap things up. But that is an incredible end to the campaign. Just beautiful. And yeah, can we take a minute to talk about the new campaign? Because I mean, we are also very loyal backers of Leader. And so like what could you tell us, Kyle? Like what's been
Sure,
announced?
sure. So there are going to be two new factions. There is a faction called the Lily Pad Diaspora, which are sort of they're frogs and toads. They can do kind of obvious frog and toad things like swim through some of the river things like the otters can.
Oh, cool.
But their mechanic for interacting with the world is that they introduce another set of cards, another suit. So there is like a frog suit of cards that's introduced while they're playing. And the reason that's important is because their involvement in the map makes them change a clearing to either dual suited. So you could have like a fox clearing that's also a frog clearing. And eventually, if they become militant, they can actually flip a clearing to just be a frog clearing. And so what that does for everybody else is like, okay, I need to craft this boot or whatever. And I had this fox clearing that I could craft with, but now I actually need a frog card to be able to do it. And so that leads to them interacting with the frog faction because that's how you get the card. So they're really cool. The other faction, and I don't we just named them, so I don't have the name on the tip of my tongue, but they are bats. And the bats, the way they interact with the map, and I've played tested a few times, so if I talk more about them, it's because I really like the bats. But the way they interact with the map is they kind of set up like little voting booths, almost as like tokens on the board, and it
Yeah.
leads to a not non I won't say non-violent because you are removing other people's pieces, but it's a way besides battling that you can influence the player presence on the board. So on their
It's like they're
turn,
passing
they
laws, right?
can
Like they,
yeah, on their turn they basically they say I'm going to do this decree, and do you want to contest it with one of the other players? And if they want to, they can just say no, and it means that they take their guys off the board. Everybody gets a card, but you can't do that too much, or the bat player will end up with a ton of cards. So you do need to kind of push back a little bit. But it does this interesting thing where you both roll dice like you're battling, but then you both have a chance to play cards that are matching the clearing you're in to affect the dice roll. So you can play a
yeah,
matching card to re-roll one of the dice, and basically whoever wins that gets to remove pieces off of the board. So it's really interesting way to interact with other players on the board, because there's always like this threat of like, I might not even get to fight with these guys. If I'm in the wrong place, I could either just have to bail on this vote and lose characters. I mean, I'll still get a card out of that potentially, or I'll be involved in this dice rolling thing that I might not have even planned on. So it just adds another layer of strategy on
yeah.
top of everything else.
Well, it also gets
With
back at
this
that idea
last,
of the
good.
supporter, the cards being supporters, right? Like if you hold a fox
Yeah,
card, it means that at some level foxes are supporting you, right? So it like gets more at
yeah,
that idea of
yeah. So you have the
support.
support of the people in that
Yeah.
clearing. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like swaying a vote. Um, it's so that's really fun. I like that a lot. In this last kind of live stream that we did, Josh Yearsley, who's the lead designer on this expansion, which is called the Homeland expansion. He and I were both visiting Minnesota, and so we kind of did a takeover of the live stream. And we did announce in that live stream that this expansion is also going to include 2 more maps. So
Yeah.
one of the maps is a kind of a marsh themed
That's very cool.
map. Actually, I can probably show you that because I
Oh,
have
good. Yeah, please
I
do. That's
test all
cool.
does my Photoshop Windows still up?
It's
Maybe.
I shared, so I grabbed it. You just have to reshare. So, but I
Okay,
mean,
let's see.
to let you know, in our new RPG campaign that I'm running to playtest some things, my stepdaughter made a frog, and when I told her that the new frogs can convert like clearings to frog clearings, she was like, yes, that's exactly what I want. I want the frogs to return to their natural habitat. So you're speaking to the frog players. I think that's the kind of thing they
Oh,
want.
good.
There is a
If you
weird
can
thing
see,
there, right? Of like the people
yeah,
gravitate towards one faction and they really feel it, right? Like they connect with it.
yeah. I'm just going to share this window. This is
Oh, great.
very, very early. So, but this is, and I have kind of overlaid the really basic idea, but this is kind of what the marsh map is looking like. We're still, the main concept behind this one is that it allows for more clearings than the other maps, because the number of
Oh,
clearings is pretty consistent. And so this enables you to sort of grow or shrink the map. So that is kind of the concept there. So this is still really early, but this is kind of the vibe. We got, willow trees and tall grass and everything like that.
that's
And then the
cool.
other one, and I'll stop sharing that, or you can turn me off on that. But the other one is the Gorge map, which is an interesting map that Sam from Lord of the Board, he did kind of a fan
Yeah.
map. And we are doing an adaptation and some development on that. And so I'll be drawing all of that too. But the main idea of that is that there's clearings on either side and then kind of a gorge in between. And then there's ways of traversing the gorge kind of over bridges, or you could go down in between. So that'll
That's really
be
cool.
kind of like our other maps, or double-sided board where you can play on either side. And so that's what this expansion is going to be. And then we have some fun stuff that we're going to do for the Kickstarter. But yeah, that's it.
That's awesome,
That's the
brother.
new
And
stuff.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think one
I'm
of the
really
things
excited.
we're always excited about is like we kind of the way we think about our work, right, is that we're coming along after you all have done the big structural pieces, and we're like the paint crew after you put in all the electricity in the building, right? Like we put all the drywall in, we
Hey,
paint everything, right? We get all
as
the
someone
furniture in.
as someone who is in the midst of exactly that kind of stuff at my house, it's all that finish work that is the real
Yeah.
work. You're doing some amazing stuff because yeah, like once it's livable, you can just hang out in it. But it's all the trim work, it's all the painting, it's all the
Yeah.
light insulation, it's you know, all that stuff is a lot. So and we, like I said, you guys have written the book for us of what's possible. We use the art from the RPG for some of our play testing and everything. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah. No, it's been an amazing artistic partnership, and I think one of the we're always very challenged, I think, to live up to it. I mean, I played the Keepers in Iron for the first time a couple months ago, and was just like, shit, this is so fun. Like these are so cool. And so then coming and being like writing up the full write up, Brendan raised this question, which I think is really good, which is what does it mean for the Keepers to be at war? Right? Like, Brendan, why did you ask that? Like, I think it's such a
Mhm.
fascinating question.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the core premise of them seeking these relics is different from everybody else. They don't seem to necessarily in the fiction care about like the control of the clearing in exactly the same way. The Marquise wants to control the clearing, but these guys, we have to ask the question, well, so they're going after these relics, but is that war the way that the Marquise wages war, the way that the Eyrie wages war? How do they interact? We know already we have these factions that wage war in a wildly different way. Even the Woodland Alliance doesn't wage war in the same way. But what does it mean exactly for them to participate in war and be interested in a clearing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we get at these ideas of, is this like we call it the infinite relics plan? Like we'll take the woodland and then we'll get all the relics. Like we won't ever we have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Or is it like these people, these elites that banished us long ago, they can never be
Mhm.
trusted again to govern anything, right? And like a kind of grievance of it, and leaving room for the faction to embody maybe one or two of those different viewpoints.
Mhm. And there was this interesting time when Root was in early development where we didn't know what to call it, and so the working title was called Rule, Rule. And
Yeah.
for one thing, that name just doesn't roll off the tongue as
Yeah.
nicely. But the idea is that this race to 30 points was sort of like a competition to establish legitimacy in the woodland. So, like, what does it mean for the vagabond to get 30 points? Well, it's sort of like he's winning the cult of personality,
Yep.
you know. And what does it mean for the Eyrie to win it? It means that they like have, physical dominance over the clearings. And so something for like the Badgers, the relics, the Keepers in Iron was sort of like it was sort of like a battle for legitimacy. Like you get those relics and it's sort of like saying like, see, these are ours and we've been here before,
Yep.
yada yada yada. So it's sort
Yep.
of like the sort of Templar
Yes.
kind of idea of like these things have been going on forever, and here's our claim to rule legitimacy wise.
Well, that's I think
And
what makes the
but that's something that we
vagabonds.
have to think about with all of them.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what makes the vagabonds, I think, such a great center for the RPG. Is that at some level, the question that you're really asking the vagabonds as you play is who should rule the woodland? Like who are the genuine leaders, right?
Mhm.
Do you have like kind of an anarchist kind of like every clearing should rule itself? Or do you have like actually among these not great options, the Erie's actually fine. Like we can live with that. And so the vagabonds have to
Mhm.
kind of choose a little bit. And the fun is we could play a 50 session campaign and they can go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
But like eventually the vagabonds got to kind of pick like who has a legitimate claim to represent the woodland in a meaningful way. And hey, and like there's no right answer, right? It's up to you and your table to kind of figure out what the right answer is, and to complicate every time you get like, oh, the Woodland Alliance, it's easy, they're the good guys, and you're like, well, how do you feel about them blowing up a bridge and killing a bunch of people? Like, are you still feel like they're legitimate, right? And that's kind
Yeah.
of I think
Just
what
be like,
makes the
well, that must have
RPG.
been someone else.
Right. Right, yeah. But that's what makes the RPG rich, I think, is it takes some of these conflicts from the board game and it puts them in the hands of the players to tip the balance, right? To
Mhm.
always be the deciding factor. So
Yeah. And though it's not a big selling point for the board game, I think it is accurate to describe it as sort of a politics simulator,
yeah.
and say like, here's all these different approaches to rule and leadership, and you could play it completely differently with similar approaches, and I think that's what makes it fun is kind of tricking people into playing something that they wouldn't normally play. Because if you said this is a counterinsurgency inspired
Yeah.
politics simulator, instead of being like, look, raccoon, then then
Yeah.
you might turn off some people. But I think that there's a lot of value into being able to sort of examine those exchanges. Because to me, that's the fun of Root, is not only learning a new faction, or in the RPG learning about a new faction, like interacting with them,
Yeah.
but also getting to see how they interact with each other,
Right.
how cats versus birds interact versus cats and moles would interact versus birds and moles, and how they all value those resources of like the clearings, like support, differently. Some need them to be supporter, like the bats, in like a voting capacity. Some need them to be insurgents. So
Right.
it's fun, and
We
I'm
had
glad we get to explore it.
when we did that keepers game I played the keepers, and Derek, one of our longtime folks, played the Lord of the Hundreds, and then our friend Connor played the birds. And the story of the game was the birds failing to keep this populist revolution in check while I dug up every relic in the northern woodland, right? And by the time the Lord of the Hundreds showed up at my doorstep, I was like, look, I'm like 5 points away from winning, so like I'm gonna hit you a couple times, but like all I got to do is keep you busy. And it had this real like watching a government fall to a counterinsurgency while a third party actually won the
Mhm.
support of the people, right? And
Well, you're
like,
not even worried about it. Yeah.
yeah, and like that's a totally like unique kind of experience, right? Like it's one of the reasons we like Powered by the Apocalypse with the playbooks. Playbooks do the same thing. Like we're talking about the orphan playbook, who's going to be the proto vagabond, the baby vagabond, and like you throw him
Hmm.
into the mix with the arbiter, and now the arbiter's suddenly the Hound from Game of Thrones with his little Arya
Yeah.
friend, and he's like stuck guarding this kid who one day may be the greatest vagabond of all time, but right now it's just a kid. And but at the same
Yeah.
time, Brendan, we've talked about like how sometimes we feel bad that we have to represent these like terrible factions as having worth. Like you have to, like your job as the GM is to complicate them.
Well, really, though, what we think of it as is your job is to represent an array of different characters and all their complexity
Right.
and
Yeah.
all of their different perspectives. The idea that any of these factions, when we get into the RPG side and we can drill down into individuals, like the story we want to be facing is not monolithic institutions that are full of faceless individuals, because that actually has the opposite effect. If we're like, well, I mean, the Marquise, it just leads an army of faceless monsters. Go ahead and kill them all. If they don't matter, they're not people.
Yeah.
Then that actually has a very unfortunate other effect. So it's the emphasis on the fact that these are still constituted of characters with viewpoints, and sometimes we can have those characters change their viewpoints, and sometimes we can have the conflict within a faction show itself. The easiest, of course, being things like the Eyrie that has that built in the cycle
Yeah.
and the different leaders on top. But yeah, it's we make your life harder by refusing to allow these decisions to ever be simple in any of these regards when you're playing the RPG. It's never this one is very, very obviously just full of evil people, and this one is very, very obviously just full of the good guys. And anytime the PCs wind up essentially espousing that kind of belief, that's just a gift to the GM to say, is that
Getcha.
true?
Well, in the game we were just playing, the Marquisate controls the territory that's being affected by the giant trout, because I was excited to get that giant trout in right away. And, my frog player is like, she's like, Marquisate is evil. Just it's the worst. Colonizers, totally bad. And she meets this mouse who's like, actually, my life was kind of terrible. The Marquisate took over. They've imposed law and order, and now everybody has food. And, here I am, the colonized, ready to support colonization. And the frog is just like, what? Like what? Like, you know,
Oh man, yeah, it's not
my simple narrative
so
upended by
simple.
your existence, right? Yeah, exactly. And so we
Yep.
get that, like you said, the board game's kind of about taking on that perspective of one faction so hard that by the end you're like, is the Lord of Hundreds bad? I don't see it. I mean, I played them, so they seem fine, right? And the
Yep.
RPG is about kind of living in the middle of all the factions and kind of recognizing that these various
hmm
politics all have their flaws, right? That no, there is no perfect
Yeah,
politic.
because in real life, nobody thinks they're the bad guy,
Yeah.
right? And
Right. Yeah.
though in video games and things, it can be fun to explore, like, I'm going to be a bad guy for a little bit, but like the motivation is usually, I think that I'm doing the correct thing. Even if it's selfish, that's it. And I think that's a fun thing to be able to see. That's like, yeah, when I'm the Lord of the Hundreds, it's actually good that I'm burning this down.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Although no one else sees it that way, they just don't have the perspective that I do. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
We did this. I'll leave on this note because we need to end in just a minute. But I used to do a lot of negotiation training with folks, and we have this exercise we do that's basically just your three characters splitting an inheritance. And each of the roles has a different idea of equity. Like the older brothers put in the most work, so he feels like he should get the most out of it. And the middle brother is in desperate need. He needs money. Like so, it's terrible, like terrible debt. And then the third one is the youngest brother just feels everything should be split equally. And you roll into this negotiation and people just it's every single time. Every single player is like, well, the equalness, the equal equality that's my role says is the right one. I don't know why these other two roles exist. Like I clearly have the and they'll
Uh-huh.
fight about it after the exercise. They'll be like, but I was still right, like right, and we're like, look man, if we
hmm
gave you a different role, you'd be arguing a different thing, right? And so like we'd love to think that all of our political preferences, all of our ideas are like really set in stone, but it actually takes a lot for you to step outside yourself and recognize I have burned down like half the woodland, haven't I? Like that. Are we the
Well,
baddies, right? Like it takes a lot to do that.
and to take it even farther, today I learned that the German word for empath, because you were saying about the German names for your stuff looking so much
Yeah,
better. The
yeah.
German word for empath is empath. When we when we were looking on our the ARCs release, they had all the different goals you can achieve, and the bottom
Uh,
one being empath. Uh, did not get a translation. We're like, oh, there you go. So having empathy is it's a universally important thing.
There you go. Good.
Anyway,
Well,
this
thanks so much
funny.
for joining us, Kyle. This was
Okay.
amazing. Really happy to see you
Oh,
draw some
thanks
too.
so
Really
much.
exciting. And we'll be excited to hang out with you guys and chat more for the campaign launch at the end of the month. Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Congrats.